And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed. To you it shall be for food. Genesis 1:29. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. Psalm 78:25. Everyday Manna with Lisa.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Everyday Manna. Today, we are going to be making a version of one of my absolute most favorite things to eat in this world. And you've probably heard me say this before, but if I had to pick one thing to eat for the rest of my life, it would be stuffed cabbage. I love it, love it, love it. But it takes a long time to make. So today we're going to make a mock cabbage roll, a variety. I do 2 or 3. But this one uses a couple of other ingredients that my traditional cabbage rolls don't have in it. But it takes it to a whole new level. So we're going to make mock cabbage rolls. We're going to make some corn muffins and then some brownie nut bites to go on the side. But we're going to get started on the cabbage rolls because they need to go in the oven and bake a little while. In my skillet, I have about a pound and a half of lean ground beef that I have just browned. And I'm going to add some celery. To that, I've got a couple of stalks. Let me move my rice out of the way here. I also have a couple of cups of cooked rice, just instant rice that I cooked in the microwave. Because cabbage rolls have rice. I'm going to add a little bit of celery to that and some carrot. And some green pepper. You don't have to add the vegetables to it, but I think it adds some good flavor to it. I'm going to add a carrot, and I'm cutting it up into, bite-sized pieces here. Cut it in half, get a flat surface to cut on. And then on your bigger end, go ahead and cut it into quarters. The smaller end is fine. And then cut it into about the same size as you do your carrot. You can add an onion to this if you want to. I'm not going to today, but sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Stir that together to let those vegetables kind of be softening a little bit with the natural fat that comes off of the beef. That's why I brown it first. If you have excess grease in your beef, take a paper towel and just get it out of there or drain it, however you want to do it. And I'm also going to add a little bit of green pepper because that adds just another layer of flavor. It's all about layering your flavors together. I love cabbage rolls, and I've been eating them since, oh my goodness, I was just a little girl. My mama would make them. And funny story, although this one doesn't use any sauerkraut, the traditional cabbage rolls have sauerkraut in it. And I thought I didn't like sauerkraut when I was little. So she would always make a dish of cabbage rolls with no sauerkraut. Oops, got a little piece of pepper there. And then a dish, a pot with it. Well, one day, I didn't know which was which. And so I was getting some because I like to eat the cabbage before it's done. I don't know why, I just have always done that. And I got the one with the sauerkraut in it, and I was like, "Ooh, Mom, that's good." Ever since then, she never had to make another pot without it again because I found out that I really do like sauerkraut. This particular recipe doesn't use sauerkraut, although if you wanted to add some, by all means add it. Now, I don't like the Bavarian sauerkraut in this dish or in traditional cabbage rolls. I like just the plain shredded cabbage or sauerkraut. I'm going to add just a touch of canola oil to that pan because it's really dry. And I want those vegetables to have just a little bit of oil to soften in. Not much, but a little. Let that brown up. I'm going to add a little bit of garlic. I like the pre-chopped up stuff's fine. A couple of cloves worth. And I'm also going to add some salt and pepper and fennel seed. Fennel seed has a anise flavor. I love it. It's a really wonderful flavored spice. If you've never tried it, oh, you get that whiff of that immediately. So good. Now I'm going to let that go for just a minute. I have here about, I'd say that's a good 2 cups of rice, but I just used the instant rice and I put it in the microwave to cook. I'm going to wait just a minute and then I'll add that to the meat mixture. I've got 1 medium head of cabbage that I have removed the outer leaves. I like to cut the core off, stand it up, and then cut it in half. It's kind of hard sometimes. You just got to work your knife in there. You'll get it. And then I lay it on its side. And I think all of the core is in the other part here. Because I don't want it to take all day long in the oven, I'm going to actually cut it into fairly fine shreds. Just shredded up cabbage. I would not use the coleslaw mix for this. I would definitely just slice your own cabbage because the coleslaw mix is too thin. You want it in, smaller pieces, but not shredded, if you will. Not too fine. I love cabbage. Absolutely love cabbage. It is my favorite vegetable. Eat it raw, I eat it cooked, I eat it steamed. I love it anyway. All right, I'm going to add my rice to my meat mixture. You can use brown rice, basmati, jasmine, whatever you have is fine. Stir that in. I'm going to switch to a spoon here. There we go. I'll just use this. I'm going to add, turn that down to low. I'm going to add about, I don't know, half a can of tomato sauce to this. And just stir all that together. Just to kind of bind it. You don't want it to be liquidy. I think we can add a little more. Just a little bit. And then turn that off and let that set while you finish your cabbage. And we're going to layer this in a casserole dish and then bake it. Pull that to the side. Now, in a casserole dish, a deep one, kind of pour the rest of that can. I've got 2 15-ounce cans of tomato sauce. You could use diced tomatoes too if you wanted. Either one would work. Kind of spread that out just a little bit. Then I'm going to add a layer of cabbage. This would be the place if you wanted to put some sauerkraut in there. I would put it with the cabbage, like maybe half of a can of sauerkraut. And then, let's move this here. I'm going to put half, add a little more cabbage. I really only use the beef mixture as a medium to cook the cabbage in my world. I'm going to put about half of this meat mixture in here. Well, I don't think this is deep enough. Let me just go ahead and put all of this meat mixture in here. Let's just use it all. You could make a couple of layers if yours is a little deeper. You would do half and then a layer of cabbage and then the rest of the beef and then the rest of the cabbage. But I think we'll sandwich this meat mixture in between the cabbage. It doesn't matter. Whichever way you want to do it is fine. Okay? Now, we will add more cabbage. Love it. Now, if you've got a core in your cabbage, which this is the core, and that part is not so good, you can cut your remaining part in half and then turn it just like this and take a little paring knife or your chef's knife, either one, and cut that down at an angle and you get rid of the core. And then we need the rest of our cabbage. I think this will probably be enough. Oh, and this is good head of cabbage. You want cabbage that has a bright green color. Okay. And put this on top as much as you want. Now remember, this cabbage, as it cooks, is going to release some water and soften and shrink. So it's going to look like you're really full, but that's okay. It's going to shrink up as it cooks and release some water to mix with the tomatoes. I think that's probably plenty. I'm going to add just a little bit of salt on top of the cabbage. Probably about a teaspoon, all said and done. And the rest of the can of tomato sauce, you could use, if you make home canned tomatoes, use those. It's really good on this dish. But I find a lot of people don't have access to home canned tomatoes. And that's okay. And then we're just going to pop this in a 350-degree oven, just like it is. If you want to add more tomatoes, a can of chopped tomatoes, you can. Whatever you want to do is fine. We're going to put that in a 350-degree oven, and it's going to take about 45 minutes or so to bake. I'm going to clean up my mess, and when I come back, we're going to get started on the side dish, a good corn muffin. I'll be back in just a few minutes. Alrighty, now our cabbage is baking, our mock cabbage rolls, and we're going to make a corn muffin to go alongside it. Now, in this bowl, I just have some cornmeal mix, and I'm going to add some flour, just all-purpose flour. I'm going to add a little bit of baking powder, a little bit of salt, and I'm just going to use a whisk to kind of sift these things together, because I want them blended. If you have a sifter, you could use that. I just find it's just as easy to use the whisk. Okay? Now, in my mixer, I'm using a stand mixer. Getting flour all over me. If you don't have a stand mixer, that's okay. Just use your, hand mixer. And I have in here some butter and some sugar. And I want to cream those together until they're light and fluffy. Get it started and then crank it up until that butter is good and soft, good and whipped in there. Now you want to start it with room temperature butter. This is probably a little bit cold, but it'll still work. It does better if it's totally room temperature. And then while that's going, I'm going to turn it down just a dot. I'm going to add 3 eggs, but I'm going to add them one at a time. You see how that's just mixing in there? Add the next one, and when that's all incorporated, I'll add the third one. I'm going to get a scraper, and I'm going to scrape down the sides. Turn it off. Just going to take a scraper, and I'm going to scrape down the sides. And let it go for just a second more. Let it blend totally. Turn it up for just a second. You just want it to be totally incorporated. And I'm going to turn it down to probably low, which on this is speed 1, because I don't want this all over me. And I'm going to add my cornmeal flour mixture, about half a cup at a time. Turn it up. Turn it down. I'm going to add a little bit of milk. Then add your flour. You don't want to dump it all in there at one time. You just want to alternate your dry ingredients and your wet ingredients. It just simply works better that way. Add a little more milk. I like to turn it down when I add the dry because I don't want that all over me. And it'll happen that way. And a little more milk, a couple of cups of milk. And then I think I can add the remainder of the flour and the remainder of the milk. Let that mix together. Till it's a good consistency. Stop your mixer and then scrape down the sides. Get any of the flour that's got on the top there down in there. Go for just a second more. Don't overmix it. And then stir in 1 can of whole kernel corn that you have drained. Or you could use, about a cup and a half of frozen corn that you've thawed if you don't have any canned corn. And that's it. Take your beater and get all that off. And then I like to take my little spatula and just make sure everything is off the bottom. You want 2 12-pan muffin tins that I have sprayed with nonstick cooking spray. And I'm going to take a 1/3 cup measurer and I'm going to fill these about 3/4 of the way. This recipe makes about 2 dozen corn muffins. And these go great with really any dish, but they really go well with the cabbage dish. So you just want to fill these up about 3/4 or so. I find about 1/3 of a cup measures perfect. It's really good. I love cornbread with I could just make a meal on cornbread and butter. My daddy always liked to take cornbread and put it in milk. A lot of people like to do that. And just eat it that way, or crackers and milk. Okay? And then do the same thing on the second pan. These bake at 350 degrees, the same as your cabbage mixture. So you just want to let that cabbage go for about 30 minutes and then put your corn muffins in there and they'll both be done about the same time. Takes about 20-25 minutes to bake. These keep very well, so if you don't eat them all, go ahead and make the whole recipe because you can keep them for the next day. Okay. All righty, I'm going to wipe off my mess with the paper towel, just all of that got on the drips. You don't have to do that, but I just find it will burn on there if you don't. So I like to just take a paper towel and get most of it off of there. And then we're going to bake these at 350 degrees, about 20 to 25 minutes, or until a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean. I'm going to take a quick break, just clean up my mess, pop these in the oven, and when I come back, we're going to make a quick, easy, kind of a drop cookie. It'll be delicious. I'll be back in just a minute. righty, now our corn muffins are baking, and in this bowl I have just some cocoa flour, baking flour, and I have here some melted butter. I'm going to whisk those two things together. Basically, I'm dissolving that cocoa powder in that melted butter. To that, I'm going to add some sugar. Okay. I've got some beaten egg here, 2 beaten eggs. I'm going to add that. I have some flour that I'm going to add some salt and some baking powder to. Let's just kind of whisk that together. Now this, you can just kind of dump in there. This is going to be a stiff dough. Just know that ahead of time here. I'm going to switch to a spoon. Use my fork just a little bit to kind of get that going. And a little bit of vanilla. If you can find Mexican vanilla, oh my goodness, it tastes so good. I remember several years ago, I went to Mexico with my sister and my niece, and I brought back some Mexican vanilla, and oh, I used the last of it up. And I was so sad because I really wanted some more of that vanilla. It's so good. So if you ever find Mexican vanilla, try it. It's delicious. I'm going to take a big spoon. I'm just going to finish stirring that all together. Now, we're going to take some nuts. Whatever kind of nut that you like. I have a mixture here of pecans, almonds, and walnuts in a bag. I've got about a cup of each. And I just want them to be a little finer. This is something you can let your kids do. I know Elijah, when he helps me, he likes to do this. My little nephew, he loves to come and help me cook. And we're just going to add these in because these are brownie nut bites. So there's a lot of nuts in here. You can, you can use any kind of nut that you want. You could use peanuts if you wanted to. And then take your spoon. I find it's easier with this stage to use a little smaller spoon. And just stir those in. Again, this is going to be very, very, very stiff. But what you're doing is making a dough. The nuts, as they bake, they add that the fat to it, healthy fat. Walnuts are very, very healthy. All right. And then you want to drop these by the spoonfuls. I like to use a lined baking dish. We're going to drop them on our baking dish. What I like to do is take 2 spoons, and then you can get it in your fingers, kind of roll it just like that, and drop them just like a spoonful, clean hands. Kind of roll it like this. Put them a couple of inches apart onto a baking dish. These bake at 425, about 6 minutes. So while you're eating, you can put these in, turn your oven up, and then put these in and bake them for about 6 minutes. All right, now everything is done, and I wanted to show you what I mean when I say when a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean. If you take a toothpick and you pull it out and you see how that does not have wet batter on it, it's okay if it has like a few little crummies, but you don't want to see any wet batter. And so that's what I mean when a toothpick comes out clean. Those bake in about 20 to 25 minutes. And our wonderful little cookies, when they are set you touch the top of them and they don't smush down. These are so good. You could sprinkle a little powdered sugar on that if you wanted to, although it's not necessary. They're sweet enough on their own. And here's our wonderful mock cabbage rolls. Now, I did take a can, about halfway through baking, I took a can of the diced fire roasted tomatoes and just poured on top. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to. But I just love those fire roasted diced tomatoes. That's optional for you, but I like it. This is hot, hot, hot. It needs to cool for about 5 minutes or so, 5 to 10 minutes, and then you can serve that. I would serve this alongside, you know, just that with a big old cup of coffee and this with a glass of sweet tea, some butter for those corn muffins, and there you go, a meal in one. If you wanted to, you could brown off the ground beef, layer this in a crock pot and put it on low and let it cook all day long, and you could cook this completely and totally in the crock pot so that dinner would be ready when you got home, and then just bake off your corn muffins and your little brownie bites, or stop at the store and buy the corn muffins if you don't have time, if you've got a busy day. But this is one of those dishes that can completely be made in the crock pot. I would brown the ground beef first, but if you don't have time to do that, it's okay. Make sure you use a leaner ground beef, layer it in your crock pot, maybe cook it on high. If you cook the ground beef first, I would cook it on low. But this is a delicious, delicious dish. Again, if you want to add some sauerkraut, you totally can. Adds that other layer of that